2, 1.
Thank you. Good afternoon. This is Tom Cruz for the record, and I'd like to call to order the January 19th, 2021 meeting for the RTC Operations Subcommittee. RTC staff will begin with a roll call of subcommittee members, introduce staff on the line, and touch on a few housekeeping items.
Thank you, Chair Cruz. Reagan Lively, Management Analyst for the RTC for the record. I will be calling your name in alphabetical order. Please confirm your attendance as I read your name. Jimmy Benoit. Let's try that again. Jimmy Benoit, can you hear us okay? All right, welcome back to Jimmy. Michelle Castro. I'm sorry, Michelle, could you repeat that? Wonderful, thank you.
Okay, bye.
Oh, Jimmy, was that you? All right. Jeffrey Friels.
I'm here.
Thank you. Ed Kaminsky.
I'm here.
Jim King. Jim King. All right. Chair Thomas Cruz.
Here.
Thank you. Lieutenant Munson. Lieutenant Munson. All right, we'll come back. We're going to try one more time with Jimmy Benoit. Can you hear us okay?
Oh, I'm here. Sorry, I had to click on the screen instead of the mute on my phone.
Thank you so much. We can hear you now. Thank you. Jim King, can you hear us okay? All right. Thank you, everyone. Please note we have several RTC staff on the line for today's meeting. This includes Mr. John Penuelos, Senior Director of Engineering, Ms. Teresa Geiser, Acting Director of FAST, Mr. Joe Damiani, Manager of Engineering, Ms. Gina Kendall, Principal Project Engineer, Ms. Julia Orvik, Senior Project Engineer, and Mr. Ken Satoski, Engineering Technician. As the chair mentioned, I have a few housekeeping items to go over. When the chair asks for comments from the subcommittee or calls for a vote, please remember to unmute yourself before speaking. Remember to state your name for the record before providing comments. Be sure to mute your line if you are not speaking. Voting will be done verbally. The chair will call for ayes and nays. If there are no nays, then the motion will carry. If there are nays, then a roll call vote will be required. In the event of a roll call vote, please wait for your name to be read to provide your vote. The chair will call for any comments or questions after an item has been presented. Thank you, Chair Cruz.
Thank you. And now I will call on Mr. Damiani for the first item and turn it over to you.
Thank you, Chair Cruz and members of the subcommittee. Joe Damiani, Manager of Engineering for the record. The first item on the agenda is to conduct your first citizens participation period. As you know, on March 22nd, 2020, the State of Nevada Executive Department issued Declaration of Emergency Directive 006, which suspended the requirement to have a physical location for public meetings. Pursuant to Directive 006, and for the health and safety of the community, this meeting is being held telephonically. To allow for public participation, the RTC is accepting public comments via email at publiccomments@rtcsnv.com. Comments can be submitted to be read aloud or to be added directly to the written record. Ms. Reagan Lively will read the public comments received by the RTC.
Thank you, Tom Cruise, for the record. This is the first time set aside for public comment. This time is limited to comments on items included on the agenda. Comments will be limited to the first 500 words, with the remaining words to be included in the written record. Do we have any comments?
Thank you, Chair Cruz. Reagan Lively for the record. There are no public comments at this time. Chair Cruz, that concludes the public comments received.
Thank you. Now moving on, I'll call on Mr. Damiani for item 2.
Yes. Item number 2 is to approve the minutes. The minutes are in order and ready for approval.
Are there any comments or questions from the subcommittee? If there are no comments or questions, do we have a motion to approve?
Mr. Chairman, this is Jim Keene with Boulder City. I move to approve the minutes.
All those in favor say aye.
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 Aye. All those opposed say nay. The motion carries. Thank you. Moving on to the next item.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Chair. Item 3 is to discuss revisions to the Uniform Standard Drawings 313 Streetlight Standard General Notes, 314 Streetlight Standard with 2-inch pipe arm, 315 Streetlight Standard with double 2-inch pipe arm, and Uniform Standard Specification Section 623L.02.01 Streetlight Pole and Arms. Mr. Chair and members of the subcommittee, the RTC was approached by industry, specifically Brandon Bartlett with Roth Lighting. He proposed a question on why we do not allow aluminum poles for streetlights. I did not have an answer, so I am placing this as a discussion item on this subcommittee, and we discussed it last week at the specification subcommittee. Just primarily to understand the issue more clearly, there will be no vote on this item today, and based on the discussion, we may prepare any proposed revisions and bring them back to the next meeting for approval. I would also note that Mr. Bartlett is on the call to answer any specific questions that may arise. If I could remind you, we would please discuss this among the members, and when discussion is completed, we will call on Mr. Bartlett to answer any questions you may have. One other thing I'd like to point out, some of the questions that came up at the specification subcommittee, I have some information regarding those from Mr. Bartlett, so we can go over that, but if you might even have some of the same concerns. But however, I would just like to open it up and understand why, if anybody has a recollection of why we specifically do not allow aluminum poles.
Tom Cruise from the city. Are there any questions or, we have some concerns with structural integrity. You know, streetlights get hit and just brushed a lot of times or lightly dinged, and with the steel poles, we don't have concerns with having to replace them. We also have some concerns with all the small cell equipment we're having to put up, and whether the aluminum poles structurally can handle all the additional equipment. And also, we have concerns with just stocking different types of poles. We try to limit how many types of streetlight poles we have to stock and maintain a stock of.
Mr. Chairman, this is Eric Hawkins from the City of Henderson for the record. We have the same concerns you do, Tom. In addition, maybe not as structurally of an issue, is And it really just a question is, I know the galvanized steel doesn't seem to rust, but the, I guess, non-galvanized steel does. I don't know what experience aluminum has in desert climate like this, and if there's been any testing or anything like that.
Mr. Chairman, this is Jim Keene with Boulder City. I talked with our electric division who does all our streetlight maintenance, and they didn't really have any objections other than just reassurance that structurally they meet the same requirements as steel. But other than that, they didn't have any objections.
Any information from the county and or North Las Vegas?
Mr. Chairman, with all due respect, this is Jeff Friels with North Las Vegas. We too echo the comments made by the City of Las Vegas in the way of integrity, also current inventory, stocking of different types of material, also concerns on our end with the aluminum pole be able to take on the added load of the new cell initiative that's going on. And also just if the manufacturer's rep, I think was mentioned, is here today, we maybe want to hear, do they have any information to provide us with these poles being utilized in an environment comparable to Southern Nevada in the roadway?
Do we have any questions or concerns from the county before we call up Mr. Bartlett? And or Mesquite? And if I could, Michelle, apparently NDOT is already using these poles, I think up north. Do you know of any information about that?
I'm sorry, I can look into it.
Okay. Okay, Mr. Bartlett, if you could please come and if you could address the structural issue, both the integrity as it relates to steel as well as additional loading that potentially could be on the poles, maybe the rust issue, the inventory type, that's an issue I think we're just going to have to discuss with the agencies, how that would impact them. And then are there any particular examples in a desert climate such as Southern Nevada?
Hi, this is Brandon Bartlett with Roth Lighting. Thanks, Joe. Let me address some of these questions here. The first one on structural integrity. The aluminum does have the same, if not better, structural integrity as steel. I forwarded earlier before this meeting a couple photos to Joe showing an existing HAPCO aluminum pole that was driven into by a vehicle, and you can see that it has the same kind of integrity that a steel pole has. It's still standing tall, you know, holding in it. It even had an extra light on top. Something you'll notice in that photo, talking about the corrosion resistance, aluminum is naturally resistant to corrosion, and it can even be left unpainted. On contact with air, it forms a resistant layer of aluminum oxide that guards against corrosion. So steel has to go through a galvanized process, and if a steel pole is hit, nicked, dinged, chipped, that's when that kind of pole is going to rust, because the galvanization has been, ripped off from it. However, with aluminum, if it gets dinged or scraped, that immediately is going to reoxidize and reseal itself against corrosion. So aluminum poles are very good in the desert climate. Currently, HAPCO has been making aluminum poles for commercial, utility, municipality, and DOTs in 34 states right now for over 60 years, including states like Nevada, Arizona, New Mexico. They currently have some aluminum poles in northern Nevada, in the Wendover area, in Carson City, as we mentioned, and we see it a lot in the Phoenix market. So they would do very well in this desert climate. As far as the loading the aluminum poles with smart cell technology, aluminum poles are being currently used to house that equipment. We would want to, if we installed one here in southern Nevada, we'd obviously want to know what that loading is, and we would definitely have it engineered to handle that load, but that shouldn't be a problem. Stocking, we currently do have various distributors. What's that? Okay. We currently have a couple of distributors, several distributors in town that are ready to stock the poles should these be approved by the RTC. So, we wouldn't anticipate any stocking issues on our end. Yeah. The distributors are really excited about it because of lower lead times. We've kind of surveyed the industry right now, and basically about right now, aluminum could have possibly a 4 to 8 week lead time advantage over steel. And the big thing about aluminum, it's a third of the weight of steel. So the distributors are also very excited about, having to maneuver them, stock them, stack them, ship them. It's a lot easier product to keep in inventory. And then another plus side is when you're actually installing it, because it's a third the weight, you need less heavy equipment, less crew members, to physically install the poles. Another big key advantage is the lifetime warranty and recyclability. So let's say a pole does get knocked down, you're not scrapping it, you're recycling it. So, with the green initiative across America, recycling aluminum poles can have a big benefit, with the earth and the green initiatives across multiple states. Is there any other questions? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Joe Damiani, RTC. The other thing that I want to point out, there was a question that came up at specs about the bolt spacing. And Mr. Bartlett, and I apologize, I got the email with the pictures that I will be sending out to the members after we discuss which direction we're going to be going, but I didn't have time to be able to get them set up on the WebEx. But in any event, the bolt spacing, he sent me the information that they basically have a model that was created around 2005 for the Vegas market, and it matches the same bolt spacing as found on the steel poles. So, I mean, I think, in my eyes, there's no vote to be taken on this today, but I'm in favor of always having additional competition in terms of material. I think that's always a good thing for everybody, as well as, to me, it's just the right thing to do to always have alternatives if there are no reasons why it doesn't meet, if it does meet all of the requirements that the existing system already has in place. So, you know, for me, I would say that we would, if nobody has any objections, we would potentially propose some draft language and or draft revisions to the standard specifications and send that out to everybody for review and for maybe potential adoption. I know the inventory on the city sites or the agency's stockyards is an issue, but I think that's something we should discuss. And if that's the only reason, then, you know, we'll have to have other discussions if that's why we won't allow it. But in any event, that's what I would like to propose. And if everybody is in favor of that, we would basically bring it back to the next meeting with potential proposed revisions. But I'd work that out with the agencies behind. I would the language, make sure the language is correct. And then if that's okay, we would send it to the next, basically next ops and next specs.
Excuse me, this is Jimmy Benoit. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can now, Jimmy.
Oh, good. I got my microphone straightened out. Sorry, I was trying to comment earlier and I was having difficulties here. So this is Jimmy Benoit with Clark County. We had some of the same concerns that the city has. And so I was looking, what are the differences as far as wind loading and stuff on these versus steel poles? I noticed that drawing, I think it was 316, was not included in this package. Is it the intent that those poles would not be an option for aluminum?
At this point, there's nothing really to be proposed. So these were just things that were submitted for discussion purposes. If it's applies, then we would have all of the particular drawings associated with it. That would be.
So my question is, because the gauge of the steel poles has been set for certain applications such as dual luminaire arms, overhead span wire systems, things of that nature. What is the take on aluminum poles as far as those types of applications where typically we use a thicker gauge steel?
Yeah. Brandon Barlow with Lighting. The aluminum poles would be engineered to the same specifications. Aluminum isn't measured in gauge like steel is, but be assured that the engineers at HAPCO would engineer a pole to meet the same wind loading and structural integrity that the steel would require.
So our specs would have to somehow differentiate the aluminum specs from the steel so that the end user would know exactly what pole he needs for what application.
Correct. Yes, we have prepared already. You know, this is kind of going a little bit before you know, we're ready here, but we've already prepared drawings and rewritten specifications just for this aluminum, and we're you know, prepared and have shared them with Joe. Once we are ready for that step, we have engineers who have written that language for you guys to look over and discuss with your engineers.
So what wind speeds are these poles rated for? Are they rated for 100 miles an hour, 90 miles an hour?
Well, if I may,
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, Mr. Chairman, this is Joe Damiani, RTC. I think one of the things I have concern about is that Jimmy, you're talking about a specific application, and you know, I'm a proponent of the specifications should be written with the requirements of the specification. We should be spelling out in the specifications what the wind load is, what the what any appurtenances that are on it, and how much the weight is, and the parameters of what the poles should be designed for. You know, the matter of fact, if we allow aluminum or steel, is really immaterial to what the requirements that pole is to do. The manufacturer, right, in this case, the aluminum pole manufacturer, would be required to provide a pole that meets all the requirements in that specification. So therefore, in my eyes, we wouldn't have a specification that is for steel and a specification that is for aluminum. We should be having a performance specification. What is that pole designed to do? And what is it intended to do? And the manufacturers of that pole are supposed to provide the pertinent calculations that meet all of those specifications.
Yeah, that's true, but in the end, it comes down to the contractor picks the type of pole for the application. And it needs to be clear to him which pole he needs to order. So if he's got an overhead span circuit, he's looking for a 7-gauge steel pole. If he has a dual luminaire arm, he's looking for a certain gauge of pole. Is that going to be clear? I mean, it's great to have specifications, but in the end of the day, it needs to be chosen correctly.
I agree with that, but the specifications don't do that. That's the contract management handles that. But I mean, we put it this way: we could definitely work with all the agencies and all the manufacturers to make sure that the specifications are written properly. That's a given. That has to happen, regardless of whatever goes on with this. The real point of the question is, if aluminum is an acceptable standard, then in my eyes, we should start going in that route to provide alternatives to, that's basically all it is. It's an alternative to a steel structure. The reason this comes up is because I am specifically concerned with the fact that in standard drawing 313, in item number 2, it specifically states aluminum or aluminum alloy is not acceptable. And that's the part that I have a hard time with. If nobody has a real understanding of why that was put in there and it was not acceptable, then therefore, in my eyes, we have to allow an alternative material.
Yeah, this is true, and I don't know why that was originally put in there. Perhaps at the time the aluminum was not sufficiently strong, I don't know. I just want to make sure that we do this all correctly and that we're getting something that's going to work.
No, absolutely, Jimmy. We would never approve a standard that, that was obviously substandard. We want these things to be, and now that we're starting with being able to look at this, I'm sure we'll make sure that before we send anything forward for this committee, for this subcommittee to review and approve, we will make sure it is to what the liking is of all agencies and or the RTC itself. So,
I mean, in my mind, I'm thinking an aluminum pole, basically it's going to marry up to the same foundations. It's going to have the same form factor and fit. So other than the composition of the pole and the outward appearance of the finish, there should be no discernible difference between these two poles, steel versus aluminum. And that's what I'm envisioning in my mind.
Mr. Chair, if I may, that's exactly what I would envision myself.
So
it's no different. Oh, go ahead.
Tom Cruise with the City of Las Vegas. I have a question for the vendor. People that I talk with who have experience with aluminum poles, that I've talked with, some of them here in the shop have told me that they get little dings sometimes. It can take a little gouge out and they can go down, a lot more susceptible to coming down than a steel pole. So that is not the case.
This is Brandon Bart with Roth Lighting. I'm going to refer this question to Danny Mitchell. He's from HAPCO. Danny, do you want to?
Let me address that for you. A pleasure having a minute to talk with you. If a vehicle impacts one of our poles, Those pools should be able to absorb the impact of that vehicle and stand structurally according to what AASHTO provides out in the marketplace. But Brandon provided a couple of pictures showing the impact of an aluminum pole, it absorbing it and standing structurally there. And if it gouges in there, it does no harm to its corrosion resistance over time, whereas as Brandon Bartlett shared with you a few minutes ago, that if a steel pole is struck or scratched or dented and any of the galvanization is gone, that becomes its weak link where it becomes prone to corrosion there. So again, that doesn't happen with aluminum poles. You know, it's interesting to see from my perspective. You know, I've managed much of the Southwest and observed what happens in different marketplaces. You know, in the Southeast, in particular, Florida once was very, very heavily steel. And over the years, because we've matched their standards and accommodated their wind zones, which are extremely high in that marketplace, you know, 110 miles an hour, 130 miles an hour, these poles are designed in that marketplace to stand equal to any steel pole in the marketplace. But year to year to year, the market share changes from steel to aluminum because of corrosion resistance, because of ease of handling, because of interchangeability. And that's the same thing taking place in Texas and in other markets as well. You know, New Mexico, it's catching hold in Arizona. And so it's just a really viable alternative to what you're seeing in the steel pole market.
And if I may, Mr. Chair, Joe Damiani, RTC. Yeah, the reason this is one of my pet peeves with the way we do projects in the Valley. My former position over in the flood area, or even with the city of Henderson, whenever I designed a project, I specifically would say, you know, this I compare it no different than the way I would have spec'd storm drain. I would never say, you know, how many linear feet of concrete storm drain or HDPE storm drain. I said storm drain because there are multiple materials that meet the specification for storm drain. And when a contractor proposes a material for that particular line item, it's pertinent to the agency to review that and say, yes, this meets our requirement. And the more we go into projects that allow for, like, to me, this would say streetlight. And the contractor would then propose, is he submitting steel as his requirement for that line item, or is he submitting aluminum? But it's not like it's things that change rapidly. It's basically, you know, bid on, and this is what I use to bid the document. So in my eyes, alternatives are just the way to help everybody and keep prices in check and, you know, do all these other things. But so if I could just recommend, I mean, I think the discussion has been phenomenal, and I will work with industry to make sure that I get the appropriate specifications and we write them appropriately. But if I could, you know, there's no vote required, but I would just basically state if, you know, we would just go back and prepare any proposed specifications and or drawing revisions, and we'll bring them back when they're ready. Not necessarily the next meeting. I mean, I want to make sure they're ready. So I won't commit to next meeting, but I will commit to, we will bring them back when we are ready to bring them back for this committee for review and a vote of review and approval. So that would be mine. But I think this discussion has been great, and it's helped me quite a bit, both listening to you guys here and at specifications. So I just think it's something that maybe we ought to pursue.
I still have some concerns. This is Tom Cruise City. So do we need to have a motion then for that?
No, we don't need a motion. We just, you know, if we're done with discussion, if you have other concerns you want to bring up, you know, or we can deal with those, you know, I can get with you separately, and we can make sure we're addressing any of the issues and concerns you may have. but this was basically to start the process and to see where we stand with it. I mean, if, you know, the way I see it, it's not, there is no reason for it to say specifically call it out that it's not acceptable. So therefore, that was really what my fact-finding mission was, is to find out if there was a real reason why we didn't allow it. Now, if there is no real reason why we don't allow it, then we talk about what can we do to maybe potentially make it a viable solution, and that's where we'll go forward. So this was the first step.
Okay. Do we have any more comments or questions?
Mr. Chairman, this is Eric Hawkins from City of Henderson. I'm with Joe on this, that at least in the sense that be willing to, you know, open up for competition. I mean, it definitely would help the cities. I guess the entities.
If I may, this is again Danny with HAPCO, Danny Mitchell with HAPCO. You know, things have changed. HAPCO has been doing aluminum poles for close to 70 years. We have many installations just across the country where you can still find 70-year-old aluminum poles structurally sound with no corrosion. You know, and I
have any recollection of why. I don't think that's when the revision was added. I'm not suggesting that. I'm just saying that when this drawing, the latest revision on this drawing was July 8th, 04. So if I'll reach out to anybody I know that was around at that time that potentially may have an understanding of why it specifically said it was not acceptable. So I will do that as part of my research, as well as drafting up the proposed specification and sending it out for review.
This is Brandon Bartlett with Roth Lighting. Just one final comment on that to Eric. In 2005, I believe, when I was speaking with HAPCO, that when they made that revision on the bolt spacing, they didn't bring it to the RTC at that time, and it was never brought to revise the specifications. They may have just brought it to certain jurisdictions around the valley, but not actually to the RTC. So I don't think it ever probably was discussed as making a revision to the specifications.
Okay, are there any further questions or comments? Are there any more questions or comments? Okay, if there's no more questions or comments, we're ready to move on to the next item.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. And thanks, everybody. That was great discussion, and look forward to moving forward on that. But item number 4 is to discuss using GIS data to identify obstructions within the rights-of-way. Mr. Chair, members of the subcommittee, I would like to share a GIS layer with the subcommittee that our transit, specifically our paratransit staff, has prepared. During the shutdown in March, the paratransit group went out, since there wasn't many routes going on, they actually went out and evaluated their most requested paratransit trips. They evaluated the routes from the home of to the nearest fixed route system, and they identified basically obstructions in the route and captured them on a GIS layer. And we're showing them here. Like, for example, they identified this route along Vegas Drive, right by Decatur. And if you click on the obstruction, if we click on the obstruction, oops, we're having technical difficulties. Oh, sorry about that, everyone. But here is the GIS layer that we're talking about. And so, for example, on Vegas Drive, it shows an obstruction. and the paratransit group went out and they clicked on, they identified it, and if you click on it, it gives you an actual photo and shows you that there is an obstructed view. So therefore, it doesn't meet ADA criteria. So therefore, they have to allow a paratransit that potentially somebody would have to do. So the reason I'm bringing this up is we wanted to show you this so that we can request that we work with your staff and potentially prioritize these repairs. Because basically, if we have an accessible route to the fixed route system, then they can deny a paratransit trip. And this would help contain costs for the transit operation since all paratransit trips are subsidized. There's no vote on this item. I'd be happy to answer any questions, but I just wanted to point it out that we are working with the GIS group to potentially generate some export files that we could provide to the agencies to show where these things are. And the attempt would be to go, you know, if we could fix something, then let's get it scheduled to get some of this low-hanging fruit off of the this repair list, and then therefore paratransit can then let the paratransit people know that it would help gain access to the fixed route system. So I'd be happy to answer any questions, and if you need me to show you anything else on this map, I'd be happy to.
Are there any comments or questions from the subcommittee?
Yeah, this is John Penuelos for the RTC. Joe, is that available? Can the agencies get access to that so they could poke around on their own, or do they have to have access to our network?
Yeah, I don't think so yet. We're working with GIS to figure that out yet. That's why I said we'll work to export a file. I don't necessarily think we have the ability to let them log in that I know of.
Okay. Thank you.
Hello, this is Jimmy Benoit with Clark County. Can you hear me?
We hear you, Jimmy. Yes.
Okay. So in the meantime, I mean, are these incidences of obstructions being reported to the different agencies by another method?
Jimmy, as of now, I mean, this was, we just learned about this maybe about a month ago, that paratransit actually had this information, so we haven't been transmitting this. Currently, we, the RTC staff, when a capital project comes through, will review it against this to make sure that we don't have any deficiencies within the project area and then do that. But ultimately, we would like to get this so that it is exportable, so that we could provide it to each agency and say, here's a list of the items that we have deficient in our routes to fixed transit, and we would like to work with you to help prioritize them. You know, because for example, they really only went out and looked at a lot of the repeat routes, the routes that are most frequently requested, and if those could get fixed and the paratransit trips could be then altered to the fixed route system, that would save a lot of money on the transit operation. So we will be working with you on trying to get this. So, in short, we haven't yet, but we are planning to.
Yeah, because this is items that the county would need to be made aware of so that we can schedule them to be repaired.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you.
And I can chime in there. This is John Penuelos again. Jimmy, Jim Champeau is the manager in charge of this, and he has made contact with Tammy Tiger over there in Clark County Public Works, and I know that he has, because I was a go-between on a couple of them, he understands the notification process through, what do you guys call it, your customer portal, so people can call in things that they see. So he understands. Yeah, the Clark County system. Okay. So that's happening on the Wednesday, Tuesdays, where it's a critical issue. But what we're talking about here is a systematic approach to take these things out with projects. So it's kind of small scale, large scale an attempt to fix these things.
Yeah, projects are fine, but in the meantime, you know, some of these things need to be fixed right away, not wait for a project to come through.
Exactly right. Exactly right. And
yeah.
And that is happening.
Okay, very good.
Are there any further comments or questions from the subcommittee? If there are no more questions or comments, we can move on to the next item.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Item number 5 is to discuss work zone and temporary traffic control related items. Mr. Chair, members of the subcommittee, we have moved to cancel the regularly scheduled cone management working group meeting, and we will continue to discuss any of those items under this agenda item, right? So we're basically taking the entire cone manager working group and we're moving it under this particular area. So this will become a standing item at these meetings. The purpose is to provide you with our Seeing Orange report, which was included as backup, and discuss any issues with the work zones and or temporary traffic control that anybody wants to bring up. As we discuss various issues under this item, we can always convene the actual working group to tackle a specific issue and report back to this group. That helps define what the working group really should be looking to tackle. If it's taking too long to handle in this meeting and any of the members want to request convening the working group, that's what we would do. So there is nothing to vote on today. This is just to let you know that this is what's going on, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions or comments from the subcommittee? If there are no questions or comments, we can move on to the next item.
Okay. Thank you. Item number 6 is to discuss and resolve various transit system, traffic engineering operation, law enforcement issues. I do believe we have Lieutenant on the line, and if there are any law enforcement issues, we'd love to hear them. Or I'm not sure transit is on the line.
This is Lieutenant Greg Munson with Metro. We don't have any items at this time.
Thank you. If there are no items, then we can move to the next item.
Yes, item number 7 is to, sorry, Mr. Chair. Item 7 is to discuss topics of interest. This is an opportunity for subcommittee members to share updates or information with other members.
Is there anything that a member of the subcommittee would like to share?
Mr. Chair, if I may, Joe Damiani, RTC, and members of the subcommittee, I do want to let everyone know we are starting the process of creating a working group, which will be a publicly noticed working group, to perform a complete review and provide recommendations on revisions to the Uniform Standard Specifications and Uniform Standard Drawings. This was also brought up at the Specifications Committee as an item to create this working group. There's no action required. You know, with you guys, this is just topics of interest to let you guys know. We would like you to recommend anybody from your agencies to be representatives on this working group. It'll be formally through the Specifications Subcommittee, but we will report back to both this subcommittee and Specifications about what's going on with the working group. At the next Specifications meeting, I will propose a schedule of meeting dates and topics to discuss. I'm going to try to outline each meeting what we're going to talk about in terms of specifications and or drawings. This is long overdue. So I anticipate this working group will take about a year to go through every specification and every drawing. Like I said, it's long overdue. Just with the discussion of the polls confirms that there's a lot of things in our specifications and drawings that we probably are out of date on. So we will also include any specialty engineering review, that would be associated with any of those drawings or specifications. So, you know, if we need structural, we'll get a structural. If we need electrical, we'll get electrical. If we need any other specialty requirement, we'll bring those in while we're reviewing those particular, and really to make sure we're complying with the current codes. So I just wanted to let everybody know that that's happening. You can have as many people as you want. You can have your entire operations committee be members of this, because this is a publicly noticed working group, and therefore there are no quorum issues. So therefore we will meet all those requirements. So if you could work with your specifications representative and make sure they get anybody that you may want on the working groups, as well as, you know, I want to point out that the agenda will be posted on what topics we're discussing. So obviously when we're dealing with traffic related items, we would want your expertise at that working group, as well as whoever is the identified representative. So I just want to let you guys know that's going on. And if you have any questions, just let me know. And Mr. Chair, RTC has no other items to discuss. Tom?
If there are no other comments or questions, we can move on to the next item. Thank you, Mr. Damiani.
Your last item on the agenda is your final citizens participation period.
This is a second time set aside for public comment. Just a reminder that comments will be limited to the first 500 words, with the remaining words to be included in the written record. Do we have any comments?
Thank you, Chair Cruz. Reagan Lively, for the record, there are no public comments at this time.
Thank you. Since there are no additional comments, we'll close this item. If there is nothing else, then this meeting is adjourned.